You've heard of castles with ghosts, but have you ever heard of a castle with a cellar that whispers? Castle Combe, nestled in the rolling hills of England, is a place where time seems to pause and the wind carries secrets from centuries past. This isn't just a pretty castle with a few spooky tales, it's a place where history is heavy and the air feels like it's holding its breath. Some say the cellar beneath it is where the real horror began, but it's the cellar that has captured the imaginations of locals and visitors alike. It's said to be the place where a family was locked away, and the walls still echo with their final cries. Some say the cellar is cursed, but others say it's just a place where the past refuses to stay buried. And if you listen closely, you might just hear it calling to you. So, are you ready to step into the dark, or will you turn back and leave the whispers of Castle Combe to the wind? You ever hear of a house that whispers its secrets through the floorboards? Castle Combe's cellar isn't just old, it's got a story that's been brewing for over 3 centuries. It all started in the 1600s with the De Vere family, who built this place as a stronghold. They were rich, powerful, and a little bit ruthless. Imagine a family where the father's paranoia led to the murder of his own son. The son, Edward, was accused of witchcraft by his father. No trial, no proof, just fear. They locked him in the cellar and left him to rot. The walls still echo with his screams, though no one can say for sure if they're real or imagined. Now, when the wind blows through the cracks in the cellar walls, some say they can hear a child's laughter and the faint sound of a door creaking open, as if someone's still inside. The De Veres were never the same after that. The family name faded, the house fell into disrepair, and the cellar became a place of silence until the 1950s, when a young couple bought the place and found themselves haunted by a ghost they couldn't see. That's how the legend began. But I'll tell you this, when you walk into that cellar, you don't just hear a ghost. You feel like you're being watched. And sometimes, you wonder if the walls are listening. You remember the first time you heard that sound, didn't you? A low, wet creak, like something heavy sliding across stone, just after the sun had dipped below the hills. It was the kind of sound that makes you pause, even when you're sure you're alone. It wasn't loud, just wrong. You thought it was the wind, or maybe the house settling, but you caught yourself looking over your shoulder, like someone might be watching from the shadows, waiting for you to turn around. You tried to convince yourself it was the wind or the old house, but the whispers never stopped. They came at night, when the air was still and the silence was thick. You began to wonder if the house was trying to tell you something. And then, one evening, you heard it again. That low, wet creak. But this time, it was followed by a sound you couldn't ignore, a door opening, very slowly, from the far end of the cellar. A door that hadn't been there the night before. You stood there, frozen, heart pounding. You knew then that something in this place had awakened, and it wasn't going to let you go so easily. You've heard the whispers of the Combe, but have you ever wondered what happened to the girl who vanished in that cellar? Her name was Margaret, and she was just 16 when she disappeared on a moonless night. The last anyone saw of her was her silhouette against the cellar door, her hands trembling as she reached for something she couldn't quite name. The neighbors said she had been acting strange for weeks, always staring at the old well. Her father found her scarf tangled in the roots of the old oak tree just outside the cellar door, but no body, no trace of her. Some say she was taken, others say she was never there at all. And to this day, if you walk past the cellar door at midnight, you might hear her voice, faint and distant, calling for help from the depths of the earth. I remember the first time I heard the cellar whisper. It was late, and the wind howled like a lost child through the cracks in the stone walls. You ever notice how silence can be the most terrifying sound of all? Meadows Whitmore, the oldest living resident, swore she heard a child's laughter echoing from the basement long after the last light had gone out. She said it was a sound that made her skin crawl, like something was watching her from the dark. One local claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing at the cellar door just before the lights went out. He said it wasn't a man, not exactly a shape, almost like a child, but too tall and too old to be real. Even the local historian admits the stories are hard to ignore. He said the cellar was built as a prison, but the real curse started when a child was locked inside and never found. No one knows what happened, but the whispers have never stopped. And then there's the story of the woman who vanished in the 1960s. She was said to have gone into the cellar to search for a lost heirloom. No one knows where she went, but some say her voice still echoes through the stone at night. These stories aren't just folklore, they're real, and they're still waiting to be uncovered. What do you think happened in that cursed cellar? And why does it still whisper even now? We began the investigation with a simple flashlight and a heavy heart. The cellar doors had been sealed for decades, but the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something waiting. The first thing we found was a stack of yellowed letters, sealed with wax and addressed to a woman named Eleanor Whitmore. They spoke of a secret marriage, a child born in the dark, and a promise made to the earth. Further down, we uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, its walls lined with old mirrors that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. It felt like looking into the eyes of someone who had never left. One of the mirrors showed a figure no taller than a child dressed in a 19th century gown, standing behind us, eyes fixed and unblinking. I turned around, but there was nothing there, only the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the walls. In the final days of the investigation, we found a small, hand-carved wooden box beneath the floorboards. Inside was a tiny locket with a faded portrait of a young woman and a note that read, "If you find this, tell the child she is home." We never found the child, but we found a name, a story, and a quiet, lingering sense that the past is never truly buried. And sometimes it calls out for us to listen. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts or the cellar, it's that one thing no one can explain. What exactly happened in that last, unmarked grave? The locals say it's just a family member, but the records don't mention them. It's like the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Some say the grave is cursed, others say it's a warning. But what if it's just a secret that the earth doesn't want to forget? We'll never know for sure. But the cellar, the whispers, and that one unmarked grave, they all point to something waiting to be uncovered. Some say the cellar was built by a 14th century baron who hoarded treasure and blood. Others insist it's the resting place of a child who vanished in 1632. You've heard the rumors, but what if the truth is even darker? Local historians debate whether the cellar was a secret vault or a prison for the baron's enemies. But the real mystery lies in the silence. No one has dared to open it since the 1800s. One theory suggests the cellar holds the remains of the baron's wife, who died under suspicious circumstances. Another says it's a portal to a forgotten time, a place where the living and the dead still meet. Whether it's a tomb, a trap, or a gateway, one thing is certain. The cellar of Castle Combe has a story that refuses to stay buried. And sometimes, the past doesn't stay in the past. You know, sometimes the truth is just out of reach, like a whisper in the dark. Castle Combe's cellar still holds its secrets, and no one has come close to unraveling them. What if the missing girl never left at all? The police ruled it a tragic accident, but the locals don't believe it. They say the girl's voice can still be heard in the silence, echoing through the stone like a warning. Have you ever wondered what it sounds like when a child is lost in a place that doesn't want to let go? Every so often, a news story comes out of the woodwork. Someone claims they saw a light in the cellar or heard a child's laughter at night. But no one dares to go back. What if the cellar is trying to tell us something, and we're just not listening? There's a strange peace in the silence, like the place is holding its breath. Maybe the cellar is waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right questions. Or maybe it's waiting for someone to finally say, enough. And so, the cellar remains, a quiet monument to a mystery that refuses to be solved. It's not just haunted, it's waiting. What will you do when the silence finally breaks? You know, sometimes the most powerful ghosts aren't the ones you see, they're the ones you feel in the silence between the stories. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher for Ya's Tumblr. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And as we leave the cellar behind, the silence lingers, like a whispered promise that the past isn't really gone. So, as we turn the corner, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the truest stories are the ones that never end. And now, I think we're ready for the next tale. Are you listening closely? You've heard of the Titanic, of course. But have you ever wondered what it sounds like when it's just quiet? Not the crash, not the chaos, but the silence after. It sank in 1912, but its story doesn't end there. Some say this ship still whispers, not to the living, but to those who listen closely enough. You might think the silence is just the water, but some say it's something else. A voice, a memory, a longing for those who were lost. And so we come to the question, what does a ship like the Titanic whisper when it's all alone? Is it a story? A warning? Or just the echo of a dream that never ended? You know, the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a whole world, a grand illusion of safety and luxury. A place where the wealthy thought they were untouchable, and the poor were just there. But behind the velvet curtains and the polished wood, there were secrets. Rumors of a hidden room, a secret passage, and a captain who might have known too much. And then there was the iceberg, this silent, ancient giant that would change everything. It was more than just a collision. It was a reckoning, a moment when the illusion shattered. The tragedy wasn't just about the ship, it was about the people, the choices, the silence. And now, as we speak, the ship's legacy lingers in the cold, in the whispers that still echo through the depths. You remember the calm before the storm, don't you? That moment when the world seemed to pause, and the air grew heavy with an unspoken dread. It was like the sea itself had turned its back on the ship. The first signs were subtle: a flicker in the lights, a shiver that ran through the deck, a silence so thick it pressed against your ears. It was as if the ship had exhaled its last breath. Some said it was the wind, others the sea, but no one could explain why the walls seemed to pulse or why the windows reflected faces that weren't there. And then, just as the night deepened, the lights went out. Not just the lights, but the light of reason. Something had shifted. Something had begun. You remember the ice, don't you? The way it glowed like a pale moon in the blackness, a silent warning that no one wanted to believe. It was just a little bit of ice, but it was enough to break the world. The last of the steerage passengers were trying to reach the lifeboats, but the water was already up to their ankles. The ship groaned like a dying beast, and the ice was the first thing to go. Some say the ice wasn't just ice, it was a mirror for the souls of those who died, trapped in the silence of the deep, their voices still whispering through the water, carried by the currents. Even now, in the quietest moments, when the world is still, you can hear it: the whisper of the ice, the echo of the last cry, the sound of a ship that never made it home. And if you listen closely, just beneath the surface, you might hear something else: a voice, calling for help, still waiting to be heard. I've read the accounts, and they all agree on one thing: those voices, they weren't just in the water. They were in the air, in the corridors, in the silence between the screams. You ever hear a voice that doesn't sound like it's coming from anywhere? One survivor said she heard a woman's voice calling her name, not from the deck, but from the engine room. She didn't know if it was the ghost of a lost passenger or her own mind breaking under the weight of the cold. And then there are the ones who say they heard nothing at all, just silence. A silence so deep, so absolute, it made the worst of them feel like they were being watched from the dark. Some say the voices were a warning. Some say they were just the sound of the ship dying. But one thing is certain: those who heard them never forgot. And some of them still hear them, even now. The investigation began with a simple question: what if the Titanic's ghosts weren't just in the water, but in the wreckage itself? We started with the old maps, the faded blueprints, and the whispers of the deep. We followed the trail of the ship's final moments, but it wasn't the crash that haunted us, it was the silence. The silence of the survivors, the silence of the lost, and the silence that seemed to echo through the ruins. We found more than just radio logs. We found the remnants of a hidden room, a space that had been sealed off before the ship sank. The walls were lined with old photographs of the crew, all facing the same direction, their eyes eerily still. And then there was the sound. Not just the creak of metal or the groan of the sea, but something deeper: a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones of the ship, as if the Titanic itself was trying to speak. The deeper we dug, the more the ship seemed to change. It wasn't just a place, it was a memory, a story, a warning. And the whispers weren't just from the past, they were still here, in the present, waiting to be heard. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the Titanic is this little detail that no one ever seems to talk about. It's like a whisper in the dark, just out of reach. It's the way the ship was built. Not the way it sank, but how it was built in the first place. There's something about the way it was made that just doesn't add up. Like it was built for one thing, but it did something else entirely. It's like the ship was built with a secret, a hidden design that no one ever noticed until it was too late. And now, it's still whispering in the water, trying to tell us what it was really meant to do. So what do you think? Was it a mistake? A secret? Or maybe something else entirely? The truth is out there, just like the ship itself, waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the stories, but some say the real ghosts aren't in the ice at all, they're in the stories themselves. Some locals swear the old tales of the Titanic are just the whispers of the ship's legacy, passed down like family heirlooms. One old sailor told me the ship didn't sink, it just kept going. He claimed the crew didn't abandon it, but instead, they were taken by the sea's own will, leaving only the hull to drift like a ghost in the Atlantic. Some say the real mystery isn't the ship, but the people who survived. A few claim they still live in the shadows of the world, haunted by their choices and the weight of the ocean's memory. And then there are the ones who say the Titanic never left port. That's still out there, waiting for the right moment to return, with every soul aboard, still waiting to be heard. You know, the real mystery isn't just the ship, it's the people who vanished. Some say they're still out there, just waiting for the right moment to return. We've spent generations trying to piece together what happened, but the truth feels like a puzzle missing its final piece. And sometimes, the silence is louder than the stories. Theories come and go, but none of them feel quite right. And maybe that's the point: some mysteries are meant to linger, to remind us that not all stories end. So we keep searching, not just for answers, but for closure. Because even in the silence, there's a story waiting to be heard. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones we shout from the rooftops, but the ones we let linger in the silence between the waves. The Titanic's ghosts aren't just in the ice, they're in the way the sea still remembers how it felt to hold a life in its hands. And as you walk away from this tale, I wonder what will the next story you hear leave behind in your heart. Keep your ears open and your heart ready, for the next whisper is just beyond the next wave. You've heard of places that hold secrets, but Holloway Prison? That's a place that asterisk whispers asterisk, and it's not the wind. You ever been to a place where the silence screams louder than the stories? Built in 1844, Holloway was meant to be a place of reform, but it became a place of despair. You think about the souls that passed through its doors, some broken, some lost, some never found. And now, it's just silence and a few ghosts that don't want to be forgotten. Some say the voices you hear aren't just echoes, they are the voices of the forgotten. Some say they're calling for help, others for closure. But one thing is certain, no one leaves Holloway the same. And now, I'm going to take you inside. Not just the prison, but the stories that linger there. Because sometimes, the truth is the most haunting thing of all. You've heard the whispers, but do you know where they started? The story begins with a man named John Holloway, a wealthy industrialist with a taste for power and a secret love for the macabre. In 1842, Holloway bought a piece of land to build something grand, a prison. But not just any prison. He wanted a place of punishment and, he claimed, of redemption. The prison was meant to house the worst of the worst, but Holloway had a different idea. He believed in reform, but he also believed in fear. And so, the walls were built not just of stone, but of silence and secrets. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The first prisoners were brought in under the cover of night, and the walls began to whisper. Some say it was the sound of chains, others say it was voices in the dark calling for help, or perhaps for vengeance. And so, Holloway's prison became more than a place of punishment. It became a place where the dead could not rest and the living could not forget. You remember how the air felt in Holloway Prison? Thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. The walls didn't just echo, they seemed to hum with a low, uneasy sound, like the creak of an old door that shouldn't exist. It started with the voices, not the kind you hear in your head, but actual whispers, faint and frayed, like the last words of someone who had nothing left to say. The staff began to notice things: papers that had been perfectly stacked suddenly askew, a faint scent of damp moss in the air, even the faint sound of footsteps in empty corridors. Some claimed they saw a figure in the distance, just a flicker of movement, and others said they heard a child's laughter echoing through the stone walls, so clear it made your skin crawl. It was like the prison itself was trying to tell a story, but not in words. It was in the silence between the whispers, in the way the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. You know, sometimes the most terrifying stories aren't about ghosts at all, but about what happens when people vanish without a trace. And that's exactly what happened at Holloway Prison, where a young woman named Maud went missing in 1937. Maud had been admitted for a minor offense, something about a missing heirloom, but the records say she was never seen again. No body, no clues, just a silence that settled over the prison like a shroud. Some say she was taken by the prison warden, others claim she was a victim of the same fate that had befallen others before her. But the real mystery is why she never spoke of what happened, why she didn't scream, or fight, or cry. What we do know is that her disappearance left a void in the prison that still lingers today. The walls still whisper, not of her name, but of something darker, something that happened when she was never meant to leave. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have heard the whispers in Holloway. Some say they come from the walls, others from the shadows. One man swore he heard a voice calling his name in the dead of night, only to find himself alone in his car miles from the prison. Another woman told me she woke up to a cold hand on her shoulder, only to realize it was her own hand clenched around a photo of a prisoner who vanished decades ago. She said the photo was still warm when she touched it. There's a nurse who said she heard the sound of a child crying during a visit, only to find no one else in the room. She described the sound as sweet and pure, like a lullaby, but with an edge of something unnatural. One visitor claimed the walls would hum when they were alone. They described it as a low, mournful sound, like the moan of a wind through old stone. It would start when they sat down and end when they left, as if the prison itself was breathing. Even the guards say the place is alive in a way they can't explain. They've heard things they can't describe: voices, laughter, the sound of footsteps on stone floors that don't exist. It's like the prison remembers everything. The investigation started with a simple request to find the names of those who once called Holloway home. We combed through old records, and what we found was more than names. It was a catalogue of sorrow, each entry a life cut short by fate, not just the law. One name kept showing up: Margaret Hargreaves. She was a young woman, sentenced to death for a crime she never confessed to. Her file was incomplete, and the more we read, the more we felt she was never truly gone. Then there were the whispers, not from the documents, but from the walls themselves. Some said they heard Margaret's voice in the halls, calling out for help. Others swore they saw her shadow flicker in the corners of their eyes. We even found a hidden room, sealed off for decades. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. But the silence was broken by a single, unmistakable voice: Margaret, singing a lullaby, soft and haunting. The more we uncovered, the more we realized Holloway wasn't just a prison, it was a tomb of forgotten voices. And sometimes, the dead don't like to be remembered. You see, the one detail that has never been explained is the sound. Not the whispers, not the cries, but the sound itself. No one can agree on what it was. Some say it was a woman's voice, others a child's laugh, and a few swear it was a door creaking in a room that no longer exists. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way it echoed, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Some say it was the ghost of a prisoner, others believe it was a trick of the acoustics, but no one can say for sure what it was. And here's the thing, dear listener, no one who heard it ever said it was scary. It was more like a lullaby, or a whisper of a name you used to know, but couldn't place. A sound that felt like it was meant to be heard, not explained. So, if you ever find yourself near Holloway, and you hear something that sounds like a lullaby, or a voice calling your name, don't be afraid. Just remember, sometimes the most haunting thing isn't what it is, but what it makes you feel. Some say the walls of Holloway still remember the voices that once echoed through them. They whisper in the dead of night, just for the ones who dare to listen. The locals tell of a woman who was never found after her last visit. They say her name is still in the wind, and her footsteps echo where no one walks. There's even a theory that the prison was built on an ancient burial ground, that the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for the truth to be spoken. But no one really knows. That's the beauty of it. The whispers don't have an answer. They just remind us that some stories are never truly finished. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the screams or the shadows, but the silence that follows. It's the quiet that lingers after the last cell door slams shut, the kind that makes you wonder if someone's still inside. The prison was never meant to be a place of comfort, but the way it's been left to rot, abandoned, forgotten, has made it even more cruel. It's like the walls are holding their breath, waiting for something to break. Some say the prison is haunted by the voices of the women who were never found, trapped in the walls like echoes of a long-forgotten tragedy. Others say it's just the wind, or the earth, or the memory of a place that never should have been built. But here's the thing, this mystery isn't just about the past. It's still alive, still waiting. And if you listen closely, you might just hear it too. You know, sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that feel like they were whispered to you just before you fell asleep. And sometimes, the walls don't just remember the past, they just wait for the right moment to tell it. So, before we move on, I wonder, what do you think the walls of Holloway are waiting for? Maybe they're waiting for someone to listen. Or maybe they've been waiting all along. But that's a story for another night, one that I hope you'll be ready for. You've heard of haunted places, but have you ever heard of a place that vanished? The Blythe Caves, tucked in the misty hills of Vermont, are said to have swallowed whole families whole, leaving only echoes and whispers in the stone. The caves were once a popular tourist spot, but something changed in the 1930s. Reports of strange lights, cold spots, and voices calling out from the depths began to surface, and the last tour group disappeared without a trace. There are no official records of what happened, only the stories of the missing hikers, the lost children, and the families who vanished like smoke on the wind. And now, the caves remain silent, waiting for the next curious soul to step inside. So, what do you think happened to them? Did they fall into the depths, or did something far more sinister take them? The Blythe Caves are more than just stone and shadow, they're a mystery that's been waiting for someone to listen. You ever heard of the Blythe Caves? No? Well, let me tell you, they weren't always just a place to explore. They were once a gathering spot for a group of friends, a tight-knit circle of locals who loved to drink, laugh, and tell wild stories by the fire. These were the days before the caves became a tourist attraction. They were just a secret spot, known only to those who dared to venture inside. The group would gather every Friday night, sharing tales of old and new, always with a dash of mischief. But then something changed. One Friday night, they didn't come back. No one saw them leave, and no one heard from them again. The caves, once a place of laughter, became a place of silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The group had always been close, but something had shifted. There were whispers of a bet, a dare, a secret that had been uncovered. Whatever it was the last thing they ever did. And now, the caves hold their story, waiting to be told. So, I ask you, what happened in the Blith Caves? Did they meet their end in the dark, or did they vanish for another reason? The caves may have forgotten, but the story is still waiting to be uncovered. You remember the way the air felt in those caves, thick and warm, like the breath of the earth itself. It was the kind of air that made your skin prickle, like the memory of something ancient brushing against your neck. Then the temperature dropped, just a little, but enough to make your breath visible. You could feel a chill that wasn't from the air, but from the walls themselves, as if they were breathing. The first real sign came when the guide stopped mid-step, his head tilted back, eyes wide. He didn't say a word, just stared at the ceiling, and that silence was louder than any sound. Then came the whisper, not a sound, but a feeling like the cave was speaking to you, not through words, but through the air, the silence, the way the light shifted just so. It wasn't until the guide's flashlight died that you realized he hadn't moved. You turned to check, and there he was, still standing where he'd left off, his hand outstretched, as if waiting for something or someone to return. You remember the whispers in the caves, don't you? The way the wind seemed to carry voices, not from the air, but from the stone itself. It was as if the walls were remembering something they weren't supposed to. One evening, a group of hikers ventured deeper than they should have. They were warned this place had a way of luring people in, then leaving them behind. The next morning, the park rangers found only their backpacks and a single, crumpled photograph. It was of the cave, but the faces in the photo were blurred, like the cave had tried to erase them. To this day, the cave is still a place of silence. No one dares go in alone, and the wind still whispers, as if it's waiting for someone to really listen to what the stone remembers. I've spoken to dozens of locals, but the one that haunts me most is Missy's, Eleanor Hargrove. She says the caves never really closed, just shifted. She claims she saw a flicker of red light inside one of the tunnels, like a signal, just before she heard the screams. She swore she saw a figure in the distance, just beyond the mouth of the cave, wrapped in something red. She tried to call out, but the wind swallowed her voice. She says the air smelled like burnt sugar and something sweetly terrible. He says he saw something move in the rocks, a shape, not quite human, not quite animal. It had eyes, but they didn't look at him. It just watched. He ran, but the cave behind him seemed to close in, like it had a will of its own. Even the animals seemed to know to stay away. A local farmer told me that his dogs won't cross the threshold of the cave. They just bark and turn away, as if something inside is calling them home, something they're not meant to see. The caves have a way of taking what they want, and what they take, they never return. The only thing left behind is the silence, and the memory of something that never should have been seen. The first thing they found wasn't a body, but a trail of footprints in the dust, leading straight into the caves. It was like someone had stepped into the dark and vanished without a sound. They checked the entrance, the walls, the floor, nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, just the eerie silence of a place that's been waiting for someone to come back. They found old journals written by the first explorers, full of strange warnings and odd symbols. It was like the caves were trying to tell them something, but in a language that had long been forgotten. Then they found the key, not the kind you put in a lock, but a real, old key left behind in a hollow tree, as if someone had forgotten to take it with them. The deeper they went, the more the caves seemed to shift around them. The walls moved, the air got colder, and the silence became a living thing, watching, waiting. You know, the thing that really haunts me about the Blith Caves isn't the ghosts or the disappearances. It's the one thing that never got explained. You ever think about how something so simple could unravel a whole family? It wasn't a storm, not exactly. No one saw a struggle, no one heard a scream, just silence. Like the air itself had swallowed them whole. You ever think about how silence can be the loudest sound? The caves themselves have a story. They were a place of pilgrimage for centuries, but something changed the night they went missing. You ever think about how places remember what happened there? No one's ever found their belongings, just silence. And that's what really unsettles me. You ever think about how something so ordinary can become so impossible to explain? You've heard the tales of the Blith Caves, but the locals have their own spin. Some say the caves were once a refuge for a lost tribe, and the echoes you hear are their voices trying to find their way back home. Others believe the caves were the last stand of a desperate outlaw, and the whispers are his last words, still trapped in the rock. You can almost hear him if you listen closely. But the most popular theory, that the caves were once a sacred site and the disappearances are the result of a ritual gone wrong. The people who entered the caves were never meant to leave. No one knows the truth, and that's what makes it so haunting. You can believe any of these stories, but the one thing they all agree on is this: the Blythe Caves don't forget. And so we come to the question that haunts the Blythe Caves to this very day: what really happened to those poor souls who vanished without a trace? No bodies, no clues, just silence where there should have been voices. The local historian, a woman with silver hair and a voice like wind through the pines, tells me she's spent decades chasing the case, but the more she learns, the less she understands. It's like the caves themselves are guarding a secret. Some say the caves are a trap, a natural labyrinth that swallowed the lost and never let them out. Others whisper of a ritual, a forgotten ceremony that went terribly wrong, but no one's ever been able to prove it. And here's the real kicker: if you ever find the answer, don't be surprised if the caves decide to take it back, because sometimes the silence is the loudest warning of all. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Like the Blythe Cave is so still, so deep, and yet so full of whispers. I wonder what stories the walls remember, what hands carved them, what voices once called out into the dark. There's something about a cave's stillness, its weight, the way it holds time like a secret. So, as we turn the page, I'll leave you with this: sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never end. But remember this is just the beginning. The next story is waiting, and it's not going to wait for you. You've heard of haunted castles, but Castle Combe? It's not just a castle, it's a living, breathing relic of the past. And that cellar? It's where the whispers start. Built in the 13th century, it was a stronghold, a home, a place of power. But something changed in that cellar. Something that still lingers, waiting for the right moment to speak. Local legends say it's the home of a vengeful spirit, bound to the walls and the silence. Some say it's the ghost of a wronged woman, trapped between the past and the present. You've heard of the hauntings that take place in the open. What Castle Combe? It's the kind of place where the evil waits for you to step into its embrace. And once you're there, you can't just leave. So, if you're listening, I hope you're ready. Because what happens in that cellar isn't just a tale, it's a memory that won't let go. And it's about to find you. You've heard the name Castle Combe, but did you know it was once called the House of the Bloody Hand? That's the tale they tell, though some say it's just old wives' gossip. The family that built this place was known as the Blackwells, a wealthy and secretive clan. They lived here in grandeur, but whispers say they were cursed by their own blood. The cellar was their secret, their prison, and their tomb. It's said that one of the Blackwell women, a healer by trade, became obsessed with the family's dark past and tried to break the curse. Her name was Alina, and her story is the one that haunts the cellar to this day. Some say she was the last to walk those stone steps and the last to vanish. The Blackwells may be gone, but their legacy lingers in the walls. The cellar is still there, waiting, and the story is far from over. You remember the way the air felt in that cellar, thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. It wasn't just the cold, it was something else, something watching. The first time the lights went out, it wasn't just the power. It was like the walls themselves had turned to stone, and the silence was louder than any sound. Then came the whispers, not in words, but in the shape of the air, curling around your ankles like smoke, like something was trying to say your name. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You started to notice things disappearing, small things, like a key, a candle, a pocket square. Nothing was ever found, but the cellar knew where they were. And then, the temperature dropped. Not just a chill, but a slow, deliberate freezing of the air, like the cellar was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. You see it now, don't you? That one moment in the cellar, the one that never made it to the official records. A young woman, barefoot and in a nightgown, standing in the center of the room, staring at the wall like it's holding her breath. The servants heard her screams that night, but no one found her body. They said she'd gone out to the garden, that she was always wandering off at odd hours. But the cellar door was locked from the inside, and no one could get to her. The police dismissed it as a runaway, but the locals knew better. They said she was never the same after the fire, that she started speaking in tongues, and that her eyes kept searching for something that wasn't there. Now, every time the wind howls through the stone walls, the villagers say they hear a woman's voice calling from the cellar. A voice that doesn't sound like it belongs to anyone who ever lived. And if you ever find yourself near Castle Combe on a night like this, don't be surprised if you hear her. She's been waiting a long time for someone to listen. I once spoke with a woman from the village who swore she saw a shadow move in that cellar at midnight. She said it wasn't just a trick of the light, it was a figure, tall and thin, with eyes like black glass. She described the air as thick and cold, like it had been frozen in time. And when she tried to run, the figure just stood there, watching her, not moving an inch. Another man claimed to hear a child's laughter coming from the cellar, but when he went to investigate, the sound vanished the moment he stepped inside. He said it wasn't laughter at all, it was a cry, like someone was screaming, but the sound never reached his ears, just a whisper in the wind. And then there's the story of the gardener who died in that cellar. He said he felt a cold hand on his shoulder when he was digging, and when he turned, there was no one there. He never spoke of it again, just walked away from the garden, left the house, and vanished. Some say he was taken by the cellar. Others say he was always there. We began our investigation with a simple walk through the overgrown gardens, but the moment we stepped into the cellar's shadow, the air grew thick with something old and heavy, like the scent of damp earth and forgotten tears. The first thing we found was a rusted iron door, half buried in the ground, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, as though the cellar itself was whispering secrets. We found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, revealing a collection of old letters tied with faded ribbon, written in a shaky hand that seemed to tremble with fear and sorrow. One letter mentioned a shadow in the cellar that followed the family for years, never harming them, but always watching, like a silent guardian with a dark purpose. The final clue was a small, silver locket found in a corner, engraved with a name that had been erased, but the engraver's mark remained, a mark that had been used in the 1800s for sealing secrets away. You ever wonder what happens when a secret is buried so deep, even the walls forget it's there? The cellar at Castle Combe holds that kind of silence, like the house itself is holding its breath. No one knows what was hidden there, not even the oldest residents of Combe. It's like the house is a witness to a crime it was never meant to remember. The one thing that has never been explained is why the cellar was sealed shut in the first place. Some say it was to protect the house, others say it was to protect the world from whatever lay inside. And here's the kicker: no one has ever found the key. Not the historians, not the locals, not even the ghosts. It's like the cellar is still waiting for someone to ask the right question. So the next time you're walking through Combe, remember this: sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you see. Sometimes they're the ones you can't. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? The ones that say the cellar isn't just a cellar, it's a prison, a tomb, a place where time forgot to move on. Some say it's the spirit of a child who never grew up, trapped between the world above and the darkness below. Others claim it's the ghost of a woman who drowned in the well, her sorrow echoing through the stones. But don't let the stories frighten you. What they really do is remind us that some places hold more than just stone and mortar, they hold memory, and sometimes, memory is all that's left of a life. So the next time you pass by Castle Combe, take a moment. Let the silence speak. Sometimes, the most haunted places are the ones that whisper the loudest. You know, sometimes the most chilling thing about a story isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows. No one has ever found her, and no one has ever spoken of her again. The locals say the cellar still hums with her voice, but no one dares to go near it. It's like the house itself is holding its breath, waiting for the truth to surface. And so, the cellar remains a mystery, a place where the past refuses to let go, and where the future is still waiting for an answer. Maybe one day, someone will walk through that door. Maybe they'll hear her voice again, or maybe they'll never speak of it at all. You can almost hear the echo of the past lingering in that cellar, like a whisper that won't let go. It's not just a place, it's a memory, a shadow, a secret that won't stay buried. Sometimes, the most haunting things aren't what you see, but what you feel: the weight of silence, the pull of a story that refuses to end. You've heard of the lighthouses, the ones that shine through the storm. But have you ever wondered what happens when the light goes out? What if the lighthouse itself is no longer just a tower, but a living, breathing thing? Built in the 1820s, Bell Rock Lighthouse was meant to be a beacon for sailors, but it was never meant to be a tomb for the dead. And yet, its history is anything but peaceful. They say the voices come from the sea, whispers in the wind, echoes in the stone. Some say they're the cries of the lost sailors who died in the cold, dark waters below. Others say they're the voices of the lighthouse keepers trapped between life and death. But the most chilling thing about Bell Rock isn't the voices, it's the silence that follows. The stillness that lingers after the wind has died down. The feeling that you're not alone, and that something is watching. And if you're lucky, you might hear them. Not the sound of a bell, but a whisper. A voice that calls your name. And then nothing. Just silence, and the knowledge that you're not alone. You know, the story of Bell Rock Lighthouse begins with a man named Alan Stevenson who had a dream. Not just any dream, but one so vivid it would shape the fate of countless sailors. He wasn't just a dreamer, he was a man obsessed with the sea. You see, he had a brother who died in a shipwreck, and that pain drove him to build a lighthouse that would save lives. A beacon of hope, he called it. But building a lighthouse on Bell Rock wasn't easy. It was a rock that jutted out of the sea over 200 feet high and almost impossible to reach. They had to build it with the help of a massive wooden platform called the Stevenson's platform, which they dragged out with pulleys and ropes. Workers toiled for months, braving the elements and the dangers of the sea. Some say they heard voices in the wind, but others say it was just the sound of the ocean. Still, they kept building, one stone at a time, and when it was finally done, the lighthouse stood as a marvel of human ingenuity. But the stories didn't end there. The sea is a fickle mistress, and the lighthouse became a place of both wonder and fear. So you see, the history of Bell Rock Lighthouse isn't just about stone and steel. It's about dreams, sacrifice, and the ghosts that linger in the places we build to protect us. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? A faint, hollow whisper, like someone trying to speak through a broken telephone. It came from the lighthouse, but no one was there. It wasn't loud, just a whisper, like a voice caught in the wind. But it wasn't the wind. You could feel it in your bones, like the lighthouse itself was trying to tell you something. It was never the same voice. Sometimes it was a woman's, sometimes a man's, sometimes just a child's whisper. But it always ended in a gasp, like it couldn't finish what it had to say. And then the crew started to disappear. One by one, they left, claiming they heard it too, that it was calling them, that it was telling them something they couldn't understand. By the time the last one left, the lighthouse had been abandoned for years. But the voice, it still comes, just before the storm, just before the tide turns, and it's waiting for someone to listen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the whispers from the rocks, but the real horror began the night of the storm. The keeper, a man named James Franklin, vanished without a trace. The sea was wild, the lighthouse was dark, and the wind howled like a mourning ghost. The last log shows him standing on the tower, lantern in hand, staring into the tempest. Then silence. The sea swallowed the light, and the Coast Guard found nothing but a shattered lantern and a single boot print in the sand. Years later, sailors still claim to hear his voice through the fog, calling out to the sea. It's a warning, a plea, a promise that he's still there, still waiting, still lost in the dark. And if you listen closely, you might hear him too. Not as a ghost, but as a man who once called this place home, now forever bound to the rocks, the sea, and the silence of the deep. I remember the first time I heard it, the voice was so clear, it made my skin crawl. It called my name, like it knew me by heart. The voice wasn't just a whisper, it was a command. I swear it felt like the walls were closing in, and the air turned heavy with something ancient and unrelenting. One woman said she saw the light flicker twice, and then the voice said, "You will never leave." She did it. She stayed for weeks, trying to find the source, but nothing was there. They say the light was built to guide sailors, but it's the sound that lures them in. The voice is a promise, a trap, a whisper of something that knows your name. The stories don't end. They just fade into the silence, like a song that lingers long after the last note is played. We followed the trail of whispers to the lighthouse, where the sea had claimed many a sailor. The walls still echoed with the ghosts of their voices, as if they were never truly gone. Inside, the air was thick with salt and thyme. The spiral staircase creaked like a living thing, and the lantern room was frozen in the past, with the old lamp still sitting in its place, untouched by the years. We found old logs in the archives, written in a shaky hand describing voices that would not be silenced. One sailor wrote, "The lighthouse speaks, and it's not for the faint of heart." One night, as we sat in the lighthouse, we heard it again, the voice of a child calling for help, but no one was there. It was the first time we felt truly watched by something that had never left. We left the lighthouse with more questions than answers, but with a deep respect for the stories that still linger. Some voices, it seems, are never meant to be forgotten. You know, the one thing that has never made sense is the way the voices sound. They don't just echo, they change. Sometimes they're young, sometimes old, and sometimes they sound like they're coming from inside the stone itself. No one can tell you exactly what they heard, only that it wasn't the same voice every time. Some say it's the crew, others say it's the sea, but no one can agree on what it's really saying. You can hear the voices in the wind, the waves, the silence, but no one has ever been able to catch them, and that's what makes it so strange. The one detail that has never been explained is why the voices don't stop. They've been heard for over a century, and they still come, even when no one is there to hear them. It's like the lighthouse is trying to say something, but the words are gone. All that's left are the voices, whispering from the stone, from the sea, from the dark. Some say the voices aren't just echoes of the past, but warnings from the living whispers in the dark, urging sailors to turn back before it's too late. Others believe the lighthouse itself is a kind of spirit, a guardian who has outlived its purpose and now lingers in the rocks, calling out to those who still sail these waters. They say if you stand at the very edge of the cliff, you can hear it most clearly, a voice that's not yours, not anyone else's, just there in the stillness. But the locals know better. They tell you to keep your distance and never let the wind catch your voice when you're near the rocks, because the lighthouse has a taste for the curious. Theories range from the haunted to the haunted by the sea. Some say it's a lost keeper, others a shipwrecked soul, but no one's ever been able to prove it. And so the legend lives on, not in fear, but in wonder, a story passed from one generation to the next, like a lantern beam through the dark. We've traced the voices to the lighthouse's original keepers, but none of them ever spoke of hearing anything like that. Some say the lighthouse was built on a grave site, others say it was a place where lovers were once betrayed. What if the voices aren't from the past at all? The Coast Guard has logged dozens of strange noises in the lighthouse, but they've never been able to confirm if they're the wind, the structure settling, or something else entirely. It's like the lighthouse is whispering secrets only we can hear. Some say the lighthouse is haunted by the spirit of a keeper who died by his own hand, unable to let go of his duty. Others say the voices are just the echoes of the sea, but they sound too human, too close. To this day, no one has ever heard the voices in the way the sailors did. The lighthouse is still standing, the light still shines, but the whispers remain. What if the voices are waiting for someone to finally listen? The mystery isn't just about the voices, it's about why they were never heard again. Was it fear? Or was something never meant to be heard at all? You've heard the whispers of the Bell Rock Lighthouse, but have you ever wondered what it's like to stand where the sea meets the stone, and the wind carries more than just salt and spray? There's something about the place that lingers long after the last wave has receded, a feeling that the light is still watching, even when no one is there to see it. And perhaps, if you're lucky, you'll hear them too, just once, in the quietest moment between the waves. But remember, dear listener, the sea is full of stories, and not all of them are meant to be told. Some are best left to the silence. You've heard of Alcatraz, the rock, the prison that never let go. But have you ever wondered what happened in the tunnels that led to its heart? Those stone corridors, cold and forgotten, whisper secrets only the brave or the curious dare to listen to. The tunnels were more than just escape routes, they were a labyrinth of steel, stone, and silence. Designed to keep prisoners in, they ended up trapping more than just men. Some say the walls still echo with the cries of those who tried to run. Some say the tunnels were never meant for escape, but for something else. A place where the worst of human nature was locked away, and where the echoes of despair never faded. It's said that even now, the sound of footsteps still rings through those stone halls. And then there are the stories of prisoners who vanished, of sounds that don't belong, of voices that only the most sensitive can hear. Whether they're real or imagined, they all point to one thing: Alcatraz's tunnels are still waiting to be heard. You know, the tunnels under Alcatraz weren't just for prisoners, they were built for something far more sinister. In 1934, the federal government started planning this place, and they had some very unusual ideas about how to keep people in. They hired a guy named James A. Johnston, who had a reputation for being a bit of a mad scientist. He wasn't just building a prison, he was designing a place where escape was nearly impossible, and where the mind could be broken. The tunnels were meant to be a labyrinth, not just for prisoners, but for the guard too. Some say they were designed to trap people in place, to keep them from running away, or worse, from thinking they could. But even the best plans can be haunted by the past. Some believe the tunnels were built on sacred land, and that the spirits of those who died there, whether by suicide, by violence, or by the system itself, still linger. And then there's the question, what if the tunnels weren't just built to trap the living, but to trap the dead too? That's a thought that chills me more than any ghost story I've ever told. You remember the day you first heard the whispers in the tunnels. They weren't loud, just a faint hum, like the echo of a voice lost in time. You thought it was the wind, but it wasn't the wind at all. The next morning, the workers found the first clue, a single boot print in the mud, leading straight into the dark. No one had been there. No one could say where it came from. It just was. Then came the lights. Not the kind you'd find in a city, but something older, something that flickered like it had been waiting for someone to look. It wasn't a bulb, it was a presence. The workers started to leave things behind: old keys, a pocket knife, even a bottle of whiskey. Not to drink, but to mark their presence. But the next morning, they were gone, just like the boot print. And then, one by one, they stopped coming back. No one knew where they'd gone. Some said they were lost, others said they were afraid. But the tunnels had found them, and they had never left. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You ever wonder what happens when a place becomes too heavy with secrets? Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a tomb for the minds of men, and the tunnels became the grave of their sanity. In 1969, a man named John Paul LVC, just a young guy with a chip on his shoulder, walked into those tunnels and never came out. They found his shoes, his belt, even his toothbrush, but not the man himself. They searched the tunnels for weeks, but nothing. No body, no clue, just silence. And that silence became the most chilling part of the story. Like the prison itself had swallowed him whole. Now, years later, people still walk those tunnels and they swear the air feels different. Like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Or maybe it already did. So, what do you think happened to John Paul? Did he die in the dark? Or did he just disappear into the silence of Alcatraz? Maybe the prison never let him go. I've read accounts from guards who swore they heard whispers in the tunnels, like voices trapped in the stone. One man said he could almost make out the words, as if the walls themselves were speaking. Another claimed he saw a flicker of movement in the dark, like a figure just out of reach. He never said what it was, just that it made him feel watched, like something was waiting for him to leave. One woman said she heard a child's laughter echoing through the tunnels, but when she followed the sound, she found only the silence of the stone. It was like the prison was remembering something it shouldn't. And then there are the voices in the wind, carried from the sea, like echoes of those who never made it out. Some say they can hear them still, whispering names and pleading for help. These accounts don't prove the tunnels are haunted, but they do remind us that some places carry stories that refuse to be forgotten, stories that echo through the stone, waiting for someone to listen. The team moved through the tunnels like ghosts themselves, their flashlights slicing through the damp air, revealing walls that whispered secrets of the past. They found old tools and rusted chains, evidence of the prison's grim history, but also something else, something that didn't belong to the time they thought they were in. One of the officers reported hearing a sound like a door creaking, though there were no doors in the section he was in. It was just the wind, he said, but his voice trembled. Then came the markings carved into the stone, in a language no one recognized. They weren't just symbols, they were warnings, or maybe pleas from those who had been here before. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone to wake up and speak. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me is the lack of a clear timeline. When exactly did the prisoners start disappearing? No records, no official logs, just a few whispered stories and a lot of silence. It's like the tunnels themselves decided to erase that part of history. Maybe they wanted to protect the people who were inside, or maybe they were trying to protect the people who were outside. And then there's the question of who, exactly, was in those tunnels. Were they all men? All prisoners? Or did some of them escape, and the ones who didn't make it back were never properly accounted for? You can't help but wonder if the tunnels were a prison, a refuge, or something far more sinister. The silence is louder than any scream ever could be. You know, some folks say the tunnels aren't just haunted by the dead, they're haunted by the living. Like the prison guards who walked those halls, they swear they still hear whispers of the prisoners' last words. One local legend claims the tunnels were once a secret escape route for the prisoners, but no one ever made it out. The ones who tried, they vanished, and their names were never found. Others say the tunnels are still watched by the spirits of the men who died there, and that if you're not careful, they'll lead you to your own end. But you know what they say, don't you? That the true horror isn't the ghosts, it's the silence. So, if you're ever in the area, and you hear something in the tunnels, don't look back. And don't say I didn't warn you. You know, even today, no one knows exactly what happened in those tunnels. Was it a murder, a suicide, or something worse? We just don't have the answers. The records are all sealed, and the families are still waiting for closure. It's like the past is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. We've searched the tunnels, the records, the memories, but the truth keeps slipping through our fingers like water in a sieve. Maybe the real mystery isn't what happened in the tunnels, but why we still can't let it go. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Alcatraz may be a legend now, but the tunnels still whisper, just like they did in the 1930s. There's a beauty in the mystery, isn't there? The unknown isn't scary, it's just waiting, like a shadow that lingers just long enough to make you wonder. So as we turn the page, and the lights dim a little more, I'll leave you with this. Some places are haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of what was left behind. Stay warm, stay curious, and don't let the silence scare you. We'll be right back with the next story, something that's been waiting in the dark for far too long. You've heard of Edinburgh's castle, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath the cobbled streets? Beneath the city, hidden from the sun, are the vaults, cold, damp, and steeped in history. A place where time seems to hold its breath. These vaults were built in the 1700s as a storage space for the city's grain supply. But when the grain ran out, the walls became a refuge for the desperate. Some say it was a place of both survival and sorrow. But the vaults are more than just a relic of the past. They've been the subject of countless whispered tales, stories of the lost, the lonely, and the unquiet. Some say the walls still remember. You might be thinking, what could possibly be so strange about a forgotten cellar? But when you step inside, you'll find that the vaults are more than just stone and silence. They're alive with memory, and sometimes with a voice. So, what do you suppose lingers in the vaults? A ghost of the past? A warning from the present? Or just the sound of the city itself, echoing through the cracks of history? You know, the vaults didn't start as a place of darkness. They were built in the 1700s when Edinburgh was a city of grand ambition and secrets. The first builders were a mix of merchants and aristocrats, people who thought they could hide anything: money, love letters, even their sins beneath the cobblestones. The vaults were meant to be a secret storage for the city's wealthiest families, but they quickly became more than that: places where people met in hushed tones, where deals were made, and where, some say, even the dead were buried in secret. And then, in 1843, the vaults became something else entirely. A terrible tragedy happened there, one that changed the way people looked at the place forever. They say the walls still remember it. So now, when you walk through the vaults, you're not just walking through stone and silence. You're walking through a history of greed, love, betrayal, and a few things that were never meant to be forgotten. You remember the first time you heard it, just a whisper, like a sigh caught in the air. A breath, not a voice, but it felt like someone was trying to tell you something, and you weren't sure if it was a warning or a promise. It wasn't the kind of sound that belonged in a place like this. No echo at all. Just a hush, like the air itself had been holding its breath. You felt it in your chest, that tight, familiar sensation of something watching. You tried to tell yourself it was just the cold, just the sound of your own imagination. But the whisper was getting clearer now. It was speaking in a language you didn't know, but somehow you understood it. It was asking for something. And then, just like that, the whisper stopped, left you with silence so heavy it pressed against your ribs. You didn't know if it was a sign to leave, or if it was just the beginning of something much, much worse. You know, some disappearances don't just vanish from maps, they vanish from memory. And that's what happened to Margaret Cameron in 1897. She was a young woman with a quiet life, a husband who didn't mind her reading poetry by candlelight, and a heart that beat too fast for the world. One morning, Margaret didn't show up for breakfast. Her husband found her journal on the table, open to a page with a single sentence: "The walls remember." That's all. No explanation, no warning, just a whisper in ink. The vaults, of course, were always whispering, but Margaret's whispers were different. They weren't just echoes of the past, they were warnings. And the vaults didn't just remember, they wanted to be remembered. To this day, no one knows where Margaret Cameron went, but the vaults still whisper, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear her voice in the silence, soft, desperate, and just out of reach. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I spoke to a woman who claimed she heard the vaults whisper her name in the night. She said it was like a lullaby, but with a chill in every note. She told me the whispers grew louder when the rain tapped against the windows, like the vaults were trying to reach her through the storm. He said it was a woman, dressed in the 1800s, with eyes that seemed to follow him as he walked away. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of something real, something that still lingers in the silence between the stones. And if you ever find yourself walking those halls, remember, some walls don't just hold secrets. They remember. The team arrived with flashlights and notebooks, but the vaults didn't need much to make them feel small. The damp air clung to their skin like a second layer, and the walls seemed to listen. They found old maps and ledgers in a dusty corner, but nothing explained the strange sounds. One entry mentioned a whispering wall that broke hearts in the night. Later, the researcher found a diary entry from the 1800s, written by a woman who claimed the walls had a voice that knew her secrets. It ended abruptly, like the story had been cut off. The final clue was a name Margaret scrawled in the margins of a ledger. No one knew who she was, but the vaults had a way of remembering names, even if the world had forgotten. The investigation ended with more questions than answers. The vaults still whisper, and some say the walls are waiting for someone to listen again. You know, the thing that's never been explained? It's not the ghost. It's not the cold. It's not the whispers. It's the way a stone floor seems to hum beneath your feet, like the walls are breathing. Some say it's the weight of centuries, the memory of 1,000 lives pressed into the stone. Others say it's something older, something that was never meant to be found. And here's the kicker: no one who has heard that hum has ever been the same again. Not the tour guides, not the historians, not even the ones who claim to have walked these halls and came back alive. So the question is, what did they hear down there that no one can explain? And why did the walls still whisper, even when no one is listening? You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals whisper. There's a tale about a woman who vanished in the 1800s, and her ghost is said to still pace these stone corridors searching for her lost child. Some say she was a midwife who fell in love with a man from a rival family. When he was murdered, she was blamed and thrown into the vaults. Now, her ghost is said to weep in the corner where the damp stone meets the floor. Others claim the vaults are haunted by a curse from the 1600s when a plague killed hundreds. The stones, they say, still remember the screams and the stench of death, and the air is thick with the weight of those long-buried souls. And then there's the old sailor's tale about a ghost who haunts the entrance, warning travelers not to enter. He's said to have been buried alive after a storm, and now he lures the curious with his voice, soft and familiar, like a friend calling out from the dark. So, what do you think? Is it a ghost, a curse, or just the vaults remembering the lives that once passed through them? Or maybe they're waiting for you to remember them too. You see, the real mystery isn't just the whispers, but the absence of answers. No bodies, no records, just a name Mary etched into the cold stone like a warning. No one knows where she went, or if she ever left. Some say she was a maid, others claim she was a madwoman, but no one can say for sure if she was ever real at all. And now, the whispers live on. In the silence between the stones, they still call her name, sometimes just a breath, sometimes a full voice waiting for someone to listen. So, what do you think? Was she a ghost, or just a story waiting to be told? And if she's still here, do you think she'll ever speak again? You've heard the whispers of the Edinburgh vaults, but have you ever wondered what they're trying to tell us? Maybe they're not just echoes of the past, but messages waiting to be understood. Sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones we hear, but the ones we feel in our bones, the ones that linger long after the lights go out. And as you leave the vaults, remember that the past doesn't stay buried. It just waits for the right moment to whisper again. Now, as the night deepens, I wonder what will the next story whisper to you. You've heard of Edinburgh's ancient history, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath the cobblestones? The vaults are a labyrinth of forgotten time, hidden beneath the city's oldest streets, where the past refuses to stay buried. These tunnels were once a prison for the city's most dangerous outcasts, but now they echo with whispers of those who never left. The walls seem to breathe, and the silence is never quite still. Some say the vaults are haunted by the souls of those who were buried alive, their voices trapped in the damp air, pleading for release from a fate they never deserved. Others claim the whispers are just the city's own ghosts, the echoes of a time when Edinburgh was a place of secrets, betrayals, and dark bargains. Whatever the truth, the vaults are not a place to wander alone. They guard their own stories, and they don't give them up easily. You might be wondering, how did these ancient stone corridors come to be? Well, back in the 1500s, Edinburgh was a city of ambition and a touch of madness. These vaults were built by a noble family, the Crichtons, to store their wealth and protect their secrets. The Crichtons were known for their cunning and their coffers, but also for their dark dealings. These vaults were more than storage, they were a prison for those who knew too much, and a hiding place for treasures that should never have been buried. You know how sometimes, even in the quietest rooms, there's a feeling that the walls are listening? Well, that's exactly what happened here. The first sign was a faint, almost musical hum, like a tuning fork in the dark. One of the workers, a quiet man named James, swore he heard it too. He said it was like a voice, low and wet, repeating the same word over and over, leave. He tried to dismiss it as his imagination, but he wasn't alone. The hum grew louder, and the air turned colder, even in the middle of summer. People started to notice the windows fogging up without a breeze, and the walls seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. It was then that the first real fear took hold. A woman in the basement said she saw a shadow move in the corner of her eye, only to find the room empty. She called it a trick of the light, but she wasn't laughing anymore. And then, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was louder than any sound. The workers all looked at each other, and for the first time, they knew something had changed. Something had been waiting. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered what happened to the man who vanished into the vaults? A well-dressed gentleman, last seen on a rain-slicked evening, disappearing like smoke in the dark. He was last seen entering the vaults, his cane tapping a rhythmic beat against the stone. No one saw him again, not even the guards who patrolled the streets that night. They found his cane days later, lying near the entrance, as if he had stopped to rest then vanished again. No body, no clues, just silence and the whisper of his name in the dark. To this day, some say the vaults still remember him, that his name lingers in the damp air, and that his story is never quite finished. I've spoken to a few people who swear they heard the whispers in the vaults. One man said they came from the walls themselves, like the stones were trying to tell a story they weren't meant to hear. Another woman described a cold breeze that came through the cracks in the stone, carrying with it a faint hum, like a voice just out of reach, whispering names she couldn't quite make out. And then there's the caretaker, who told me he's heard the whispers for over 30 years. He said they get louder at night, and sometimes he feels like he's being watched by something that's not quite there. One visitor even claimed to see a figure in the distance, just a silhouette, standing at the edge of the vaults. It vanished the moment they turned to look, leaving only a chill in its wake. These are not just stories. They're echoes of something real, something that lingers in the stone and the silence, waiting for someone to listen. We followed the trail of whispers into the vaults, where the air hung heavy with damp and the stone walls seemed to breathe. What we found was not just a place, but a memory that refused to let go. The investigation started with the old records, ledgers, maps, and the names of those who vanished without a trace. It was like reading the final chapter of a book we never wanted to finish. We found her tools made with fairy instruments, rusted but still holding their shape hidden behind a loose stone in the wall. It was as if she had left them behind, waiting for someone to find them. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And then, in the deepest chamber, we found something that made the hairs on our arms rise, footprints in the dust, leading into the darkness, as if someone had been here just last night. It wasn't just the footprints, it was the silence that followed. A silence so deep, it felt like the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. You see it now, don't you? That one detail that just won't stop whispering. The way the light catches on the stone, the way it seems to glow from within. It's not the walls, not the damp, not the cold, it's that single, unexplained spot that stares back at you. It's not a stain, not a crack, not even a mark. It's something else, something that just doesn't belong. And it's been there for centuries, untouched, unexplained. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's a secret the vaults have been hiding for too long. Some say it's a sign. Some say it's a warning. And some say it's a reminder that even in the oldest places, there are things we still don't understand. That even in the darkest corners of history, there are whispers that refuse to be silenced. So the question remains, what is that one detail that has never been explained? And why does it keep whispering, even now? That's the real mystery, isn't it? The one that never fades, no matter how long you've been listening. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered who first whispered that the vaults were cursed? Some say it was a maid who vanished in the 1700s. Others say it was a merchant who swore he heard his own voice echo back from the stone. There's even a local legend about a ghostly child who used to run through the tunnels crying for her mother, and the sound of her footsteps still echoes in the silence today. You might think this is just old wives' tales, but even today, locals swear that when the wind howls through the narrow passageways, it carries voices, some say in Scottish, some say in a language no one understands. And then there's the theory that the vaults are not just haunted, but cursed. That they were built on sacred ground, and the very act of sealing people inside for punishment has cursed the place for centuries. No one knows for sure what the whispers mean, but one thing's certain. The vaults have a story that refuses to be forgotten, and it's still telling it in the language of stone and silence. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ones you see, but the ones you can't quite place. The whispers in the vaults don't come from any known source. No one's ever found a body. No one's ever heard the same voice twice. It's like the walls are remembering something they're not supposed to. The police checked every inch of the vaults, but there's no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence of struggle. Just the sound of a voice, low, feminine, and always just out of reach. It's like the walls are trying to tell us something, but the words keep slipping away. There's no official record of a disappearance from the vaults, but there are rumors. Some say it's a lover's last stand, others a secret meeting gone wrong. But the truth, it's still wrapped in the same mist that clings to these walls, waiting for someone to listen. So, what do you think? Is the whisper a warning, a memory, or something else entirely? The vaults don't just hold history, they hold questions. And sometimes, the only way to answer them is to let the silence speak. You've heard the whispers, felt the cold, and walked the narrow passageways where time seems to fold in on itself. But what if the vaults are not just a place, but a memory waiting for the right person to listen? Sometimes, the most terrifying silence is the one that holds a story unspoken, unburied, and waiting for someone to reach out and touch it. The past doesn't stay buried. It lingers, just like the echoes in these walls waiting for you to turn the corner or step into the light. And so, we leave you with the whispering walls and the question, what will you hear when you finally step inside? You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old beast in the Rockies, built for the wealthy, but something about it always felt off. Like it was waiting for someone. It was built in the early 1900s, a dream of a man who wanted to create a place where the rich could escape the world. But it wasn't just a hotel, it was a refuge for the lost, the lonely, and the ones who never quite fit in. The Stanley Hotel has a reputation that's more than just a rumor. It's a place where the past lingers and the present can't quite shake it. Some say it's haunted by the souls of those who stayed and never left. But don't think it's just about ghosts. There's something deeper here, something about the way the hotel holds its secrets, like it's watching, waiting for the next person to come knocking. So, what do you think? Is it just a place, or is it something more? Let's take a look inside and see what kind of stories the Stanley Hotel has to tell. You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always the grand, snow-dusted wonder you see today. It started as a humble little inn in the 1880s, a modest place where the dreams of a young man named William Stanley took root. William Stanley was a businessman with a vision, and he saw this humble inn as the start of something bigger. He poured his heart and money into it, dreaming of a place where people could come to escape the world. But Stanley wasn't just a builder, he was a man with a secret. He had a wife, and she was not the kind of woman who could be ignored or discarded. The rumors say he treated her poorly, and the whispers of her fate began to spread. When Stanley died in 1898, the hotel was left in the hands of his heirs, and the rumors about his wife grew louder. Some said she had died in a tragic accident, others whispered that she had been locked away. Either way, the story of the Stanley Hotel had only just begun. The hotel changed hands many times over the years, and each new owner had their own ghosts to deal with. Some say the hotel has been a place of refuge, others say it's where the unseen guests still linger, waiting for the right moment to return. You remember the way the air smelled that first night, like old paper and the faint tang of something just beyond the edge of memory. It was a smell that clung to the back of your neck, like the hotel had been waiting for you. The elevator doors opened with a groan, like the sigh of a tired old man. You stepped inside, and for a moment, the silence was so thick it felt like it had been waiting for you. The first time you heard it, it was just a whisper, like a voice in the walls, or maybe a memory you hadn't forgotten. You turned, but there was no one there. It wasn't until the second night that you realized it wasn't just the hotel remembering you, it was remembering what had happened before you ever arrived. And then, you started to wonder if the hotel was waiting for someone else to come back, someone who had left far too soon. You remember the hotel's grandeur, but there's something quieter now. The elevator hums like a tired old friend, and the stairwell seems to hold its breath between floors. Have you ever felt the weight of a place that's watching you? One night, a guest reported hearing voices soft, like whispers in a language they didn't know. They said they felt followed, not by footsteps, but by a presence that settled on their shoulders. It was the kind of feeling that lingers long after you've left. Then there was the disappearance. A guest never returned from their room. No signs of struggle, no alarm. Just a door left ajar, and a single, unmarked envelope on the pillow, filled with a handwritten note that read, "I found them." The police called it a sudden departure, but the staff knew better. The night he vanished, the hotel's lights flickered like a heartbeat, and the wind howled through the vents as if the building itself was mourning. To this day, the staff swears that the room is still empty. The door never closes, and sometimes, in the quietest moments, you can hear the faintest sound of someone walking away down the hallway into the darkness. I remember the first time I heard the whispers in the hallway. It was late, and the hotel was quiet, but the air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. The voices were soft, like a lullaby, but they weren't for me. They were calling to someone else, someone who had come before and hadn't left. Another said she felt hands on her shoulder, but when she turned, the room was empty. The only thing she found was a single, unopened envelope on her bed. And then there's the woman who claimed she saw the ghost of a hotel employee in the kitchen, standing by the stove, holding a tray as if waiting for someone to come. No one can prove it, but they all say the same thing. The Stanley isn't just a place, it's a host. And sometimes it invites you to stay a little longer than you planned. The investigators arrived with clipboards and a sense of trepidation, like old friends who'd been warned not to come over again. They were here to find the truth, but they were also here to feel the weight of the Stanley's past. They scoured the archives for any mention of the unseen guests, a phrase that had surfaced in every account. Some pages had been torn, as if someone had tried to erase the memory of what happened here. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now. and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The team interviewed the old staff, now in their 90s, who spoke in hushed tones of whispers in the halls and doors that opened on their own. They didn't know if they were being haunted or if they were just remembering too much. One thing became clear: the Stanley had a way of making people forget. The more they tried to uncover the truth, the more the past seemed to slip through their fingers, like smoke in the cold air of a forgotten room. You've heard the tales of the Stanley Hotel's ghosts, but there's one thing that's never been explained. It's not the moans in the halls or the whispers in the elevator, it's the absence of a single detail that haunts every account. No one can agree on the exact time the ghostly figures appear. Some say it's midnight, others say it's 3:17 a.m. But what they all say is that the guests never seem to notice they're being watched. The hotel staff have their own theories. Some say it's a trick of the old electrical system, others say it's the lingering presence of the hotel's first guests. But no one can say for sure what they actually saw, and that's why it's still unsolved. Not because there's no evidence, but because there's too much. The Stanley Hotel is full of stories, but the one that remains just out of reach is the one that haunts us all. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the locals really think? They say the hotel isn't just haunted, it's been *hosted*. Some say the ghosts aren't just from the past, they're still here, lingering in the upstairs halls, waiting for the next guest to make a mistake. They say the hotel isn't cursed, it's *invited*. Every year, it opens its doors to those who need to stay a little longer than they planned. And if you're ever in S Park, don't be surprised if you see someone walking through the hotel doors at midnight. Just don't follow them. The locals don't know why the hotel stays open. They just know that sometimes the guests never leave. And still, to this day, the Stanley Hotel waits for answers. Some say it's not the ghosts that linger, but the questions. What happened to those who vanished without a trace? Who, or what, welcomed them with open arms and never let them go? The mystery isn't just about the past, it's about the present. Are the stories we tell here just echoes of what once was, or do they shape the very air we breathe inside these walls? The Stanley Hotel is more than a place. It's a mirror, and in that mirror, we see not just the ghosts of the past, but the questions we still haven't answered about ourselves. So, dear listener, when you leave this story behind, ask yourself, what are the unseen guests waiting for in your own life? And are you ready to find out? You've heard the whispers of the Stanley Hotel, but have you ever wondered what it's like to walk its halls alone at midnight? What secrets might you find if you dared to listen closely? Sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that never get told. What if the hotel's ghosts aren't here to scare you, but to remind you that some places are never truly empty? And when the lights go out and the silence falls, you might just realize that you're not the only one who's waiting for the story to continue. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself in the mountains of Colorado, and the wind feels just a little too still, remember, the Stanley Hotel is always listening. You've heard of the Blythe Caves, haven't you? That place out in the Blue Ridge, where the rocks are like the bones of the earth, and the air smells like moss and forgotten time. They say the caves were carved by the hands of early settlers, but some say they were built by something older, something that still lives in the dark. The locals tell stories of people who went in and never came out, of whispers in the stone, and of a ghost that walks the tunnels, never finding peace. But what really makes this place special is the way it feels like it's watching you, like it knows you're there, and it's waiting for you to leave. So, you're about to step into the Blythe Caves, where the past lingers like smoke, and the echoes of the lost still haunt the stone. Back in the 1890s, a group of wealthy investors, led by a man named William Blythe, decided to build a grand resort in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. They believed the caves could be transformed into a luxurious retreat for the elite. They hired a local builder, James Harlow, to oversee the work. He was a man of few words, but his hands were always stained with mud and his eyes always seemed to follow the workers like a shadow. One night, during a storm, a group of workers disappeared. No one saw them go, and no one heard from them again. The only clue was a single, blood-stained glove found near the entrance, half buried in the dirt. The investors pulled out of the project, and the caves were left to rot. James Harlow, the builder, vanished soon after. Some say he was taken by the caves, others say he never left at all. And so, the Blythe Caves were left to the silence of time, a place where the past clung to the stone like lichen, and the echoes of the lost still linger in the dark. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like there's a weight pressing down, and your skin prickles as if someone's watching? That's what I felt the first time I stepped into Blythe Caves. The silence wasn't natural. It was too still, like the cave itself was holding its breath. I could hear my own footsteps, but they echoed like someone else was walking with me. Then came the smell, not a bad one, but something old, like dust and damp earth. and just a hint of something sweet and wrong, like burnt sugar or something that shouldn't be there. I told myself it was just the cave, just my imagination, but the way the air felt, the way the silence pressed in, the smell of it wasn't just the place. It was something else, something waiting. You remember the last time someone walked into those caves and never came out, don't you? It was a summer day, the sun was high, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. But that day, the wildflowers didn't bloom, they withered in the silence. The man who vanished was a geologist, a quiet man with a deep respect for the land. He told his wife he was just checking for signs of a hidden spring, but the next morning, his truck was found parked near the cave mouth and his boots were still inside, as if he'd stopped just to take one last look. The local sheriff said it was a case of miscommunication, that the man had simply wandered off. But the townspeople knew better. They'd seen the caves do things. They heard the whispers in the night, and they knew the silence was never empty. Now, every time the wind shifts, people say they hear a voice, a man's voice, calling from the depths. And every time the sun sets, the caves seem to breathe, as if they're waiting for the next person to walk in and never come out. I spoke to a retired school teacher named Mabel, who said she heard the caves whispering at night. She told me it wasn't voices, it was a sound like fingers scraping glass. Another man, a former ranger, claimed he saw a flicker of movement inside the caverns, something too tall, too still, too silent. It didn't move, it just waited. A local baker, who's lived here her whole life, insists the caves are alive. They've always been there, but lately they've been watching. Some say the caves are just a place, but others swear they're a mirror reflecting what we've done and what we've hidden. And if you listen closely, you might hear them whispering your name. The first clue came from a faded postcard, found tucked in the back of a dusty shoebox. It showed the caves just as they were, but with a single word scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting, "Don't go in." We followed the trail of old maps and whispers until we found the local librarian, who had been keeping the story alive for decades. She showed us a photo of the caves from the 1950s, and the same word was etched into the stone by the entrance. We found a journal, weathered and brittle, kept by a woman who had once gone missing. Its pages were filled with strange symbols, warnings, and a final entry that read, "It's not just the caves, it's the ones who have been there before." As we dug deeper, we uncovered something unsettling: records of other disappearances, all around the same time, all near the caves. No bodies, no answers, just the same silent warning etched into the stone. And then, we found the last entry, written in the same shaky hand as the first. It ended with a single line, "I'm still here, just not in the caves anymore." You know, the thing that haunts me more than the caves themselves is the one detail no one can explain. It's like a whisper in the dark, just out of reach. It's not the missing person, not the cave, not the cold. It's something else entirely. Something they never found, never asked about, and never spoke of. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Every time I'd asked about it, they just smile and say that's not our story to tell. But you know what? That's exactly the kind of thing that makes a story worth telling. And so I keep asking, I keep looking, because sometimes the truth is hiding in the quietest, most unspoken places of all. You've heard the tales, but let's not forget the people who still talk about the Blyth Caves. There's an old widow in town who insists she's seen a shadow moving through the rocks, even when she's alone. Some say the caves are a portal, a gateway to something ancient that the earth has been trying to keep buried for centuries. Others say it's just the wind, but the wind doesn't whisper in the caves. There's a local legend about a woman who disappeared in the caves decades ago. Her husband still comes by every full moon, hoping she'll just appear at the mouth of the cave, as if she were waiting for him. Some say she was cursed, others say she was taken by something that doesn't belong in this world. But the truth, it's still buried in the dark, and no one dares to dig it up. So what do you think, dear listener? Is it better to leave the past in the dark, or to risk waking something that shouldn't be stirred? You know, sometimes the most haunting stories aren't the ones we solve, but the ones that refuse to let go. The Blyth Caves still whisper, and no one's sure if they're telling the truth or just trying to scare us. They say the last person to enter those caves never came out. No footprints, no tools, just a single lantern left burning in the dark, like a warning light in a forgotten dream. The local historian who tried to investigate got lost in the caves. Not literally, but emotionally. He came out with a notebook full of questions and a heart full of doubt. So here we are, still chasing the echo of a voice that never returned. And maybe, just maybe, the caves are trying to tell us something we're not ready to hear. You know, Sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. Those caves with their silence and stone might just be the perfect stage for a story that never ends. And you, dear listener, are still here, still listening. Maybe that's the real mystery. Why do we stay, even when the story is safe to leave? So, let's move on. Let's go deeper into the dark, where the stories are older than the stones, and the truth is still waiting to be found. And remember, the best stories aren't just told, they're felt. So, wrap up warm, and let's hear the next one. You've heard of the lighthouse keepers, the brave souls who stood guard over the treacherous waters of the Scottish coast. But what if I told you some of them never left? The Bell Rock Lighthouse, perched on a jagged rock in the North Sea, has whispered secrets through the decades, voices, not of the living, but of the dead. Built in the 1810s by Robert Stevenson, this was no ordinary lighthouse. It was a marvel of engineering, a beacon of hope for sailors, and a tomb for those who failed to reach it. But some say it was also a tomb for those who lived inside it. Now, some say the place is haunted by the voices of the keeper's men who lived and died in this tower. Their whispers echo through the stone, calling out to the sea, calling out to those who listen. But what could have caused such a place to hold onto its past? Was it the loneliness, the isolation, or perhaps the weight of so many lives lost to the merciless sea? And now you're asking yourself, have you ever heard the voices? Or do you think it's just the wind, the sea, and the memory of those who once called this place home? You ever wonder how a lighthouse could be built in the middle of a storm? Well, Bell Rock wasn't just any rock, it was a jagged, lonely outcrop in the middle of the Pacific, and the men who built it had to face the sea, the wind, and their own doubts. The job was given to a man named Robert Stevenson, who had a reputation for building lighthouses in the worst places. He didn't just build them, he lived them, and he knew the sea better than most. They built the tower piece by piece, lifting massive stone blocks into place with ropes and pulleys. It was a brutal, dangerous job, and the cost was high. Many of them never made it home. The lighthouse was completed in 1810, but it wasn't a miracle. It was a testament to human grit and to the lives that were lost in the process. And somewhere in the stone, the voices of those men still linger. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A faint whisper, like wind through empty shells, just before the storm rolled in. It wasn't loud, just there. A voice, low and hollow, echoing from the stone walls like it had always belonged there. They'd all been there for months, working the nights, and the voice never stopped. It didn't get louder, just more certain. And then, one night, the voice started speaking in English. Not just any English, but the kind that belonged to someone who'd lived and died here. They said it was the keeper's wife, the one who drowned in the storm that killed him. But you know what they don't? She's still here, waiting for someone to listen. You ever heard a voice that doesn't belong to anyone? A whisper in the dark that doesn't come from the walls, but from the sea itself. That's what they say happened here. One night, a keeper named James Bell heard it voices. Not just one, but dozens, overlapping, pleading, screaming. The sound was coming from the rocks below, not from the tower above. The next morning, the Coast Guard found his body on the rocks. He'd been dragged down by the tide, but the strange thing was there was no sign of a struggle. Just his coat, soaked and heavy. Now, the lighthouse is silent, but the voices remain. Some say they're still there, calling out to the sea, to the rocks, to anyone who dares to listen. So, when you hear a voice that doesn't belong to anyone, maybe you should ask yourself, is it the sea, or is it the rocks calling your name? I've heard from more than one sailor that the rock itself seems to whisper. They say it's a voice, not a voice like something trying to speak through the wind, through the stone, through the silence. One man told me he was standing on a cliff at dawn, just the two of them, and he swore the rock made a sound like a child crying. He said it was a sound that didn't belong to the world. Some say the voices are the souls of the men who died here, those who were lost to the sea, or who died by their own hands. Others say it's not them. They say it's the rock itself, trying to remember what it's been through. Whatever it is, it's real, and it's waiting for someone to listen. We started by combing through old lighthouse records, hoping to find something, anything that might explain the voices. What we found was more unsettling than we expected. The logs mention a man named Thomas Haskins, a keeper who vanished in 1875. His last entry spoke of voices coming from the rocks, but no one believed him. It was dismissed as madness. One night, during a recording session, the voice came again. This time, it was louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a command, and it repeated over and over in a voice that sounded almost like a child's. We tried to explain it away as a natural echo, but the voice was too clear, too focused. It didn't seem to come from anywhere in particular. It just appeared. It was then that we realized the real mystery wasn't the voice, it was the silence that followed. The absence of explanation, the lack of closure. And that, my friends, is where the real fear begins. You know, the one thing that's really bugged me about Bell Rock is that no one seems to know what the voices are saying. It's like they're just there without a message. Some say it's the keepers, others say it's the sea itself, but no one has ever been able to pin down the exact words. It's like the voices are just waiting to be heard. You think about all the people who have come here, all the lives that were lived in this place, and it makes you wonder, what were they saying when they died? Did they leave something behind, or just silence? It's not just the voices that haunt this place, it's the mystery of them. The silence that follows, the questions that never get answered. That's what really chills me. So, what do you think? Are the voices trying to tell us something? Or are they just echoes of a place that never let go? Some say the voices aren't just echoes of the past, but warnings, whispers from the sea itself. You ever notice how the wind sounds like a voice in the rocks? It's like the ocean's trying to tell us something. Others believe the lighthouse was built on sacred ground, where the dead still walk. You ever feel like the earth is watching you? It's like the rocks are holding their breath. There's even a local legend about a keeper who never left the tower. They say he was cursed to watch the sea forever, his voice trapped in the rocks. You ever feel like you're being watched by something that doesn't want to be seen? And then there's the theory that the voices are just the sound of the wind and waves. But it's hard not to believe something more is at play. You ever hear a voice when no one's there? It's like the world is speaking to you in a language you can't understand. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub Smart Speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The mystery of Bell Rock Lighthouse isn't just about ghosts, it's about why a place so carefully built, so full of human ambition, still feels like it's holding its breath. No one has ever found the source of those voices, and no one really knows if they're real or just the echo of a place that remembers too well. We still hear it, sometimes, not just in stories, but in the silence between the waves. Like the lighthouse is still waiting for someone to listen. Maybe that's the real mystery, not the voices, but the silence that follows. And the way a place like Bell Rock holds on to the past, like it's trying to tell us something. So we'll keep listening, because sometimes the best stories are the ones that never end. You've heard the whispers of the Bell Rock, but have you ever wondered what it's like to stand where the sea meets the stone and feel the weight of centuries in your bones? Sometimes, the silence between the voices is louder than the voices themselves. What do you think the lightkeeper says to the sea when no one is listening? There's a story in every creak of the wood and every echo in the stone. What if the light itself is a memory, and the voices are just the sea remembering the past? And when the tide rolls in, and the light goes dark, do you think the sea keeps its promises, or does it take them back with the waves? But for now, let the light guide you. Until next time, stay warm, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never end. You've heard of haunted ships, but have you ever heard of a ship that was never meant to sail? The SS Valentia, a luxury liner. Yes, but one that sank in 1918, taking 1,100 souls with it. You'd think the ocean would be the last place for ghosts, but the Valentia's story is anything but calm. The Valentia wasn't just any ship. It was built for the wealthy, with grand ballrooms, a dining room that could seat 300, and a private library. It was a floating palace, yet it met its end in a storm that no one could have predicted. Now, over a century later, the Valentia is still whispered about in fishing villages along the coast. Sailors tell of lights in the water, voices calling from the depths, and unnatural silence when the storm rolls in. It's said the ship still waits for those who dared to sail with it. And if you ever find yourself near the coast on a stormy night, you might hear it too. A low, mournful sound, like a ship calling for help. You can't see it, but you know it's there, and you know it's waiting. You've heard the name, but do you know the story? The SS Valentia wasn't just a ship, it was a floating graveyard, a place where fate turned on a dime, and lives were lost in the blink of an eye. Built in 1922, the Valentia was a marvel of engineering, a luxury liner that promised comfort and safety, but on a fateful night in 1940, it became something else entirely. The captain, a man of few words, had seen too many storms, and the night of the Valentia's doom was no different, except this time, the storm was in the water, not the sky. It wasn't the storm that claimed them, but the sea itself, unrelenting, merciless, and waiting for the moment to take its toll. The Valentia was more than a ship, it was a vessel of fate, and its passengers, like so many before them, were swept into the dark waters with no warning, no time to prepare. You remember the smell of salt and old wood, don't you? The way the air clung to your skin like a memory you couldn't quite place. That was the first sign, really. A scent that wasn't quite right, but you knew it was there. It started with the whispers, faint like wind through a hollow tree. You'd hear them when you were alone, just before sleep took hold. A voice, low and mournful, calling your name. The first time you saw it, It was just a shape, a figure in the mist standing at the edge of the dock. You couldn't tell if it was a person or something else, but you knew it was watching you. Then came the cold. Not the kind that comes with a storm, but a chill that seeped into your bones no matter the season. You'd feel it at night, in your bed, in the silence between the whispers. And then you started to wonder, what if the sea wasn't just remembering? What if it was waiting for someone to listen, for someone to hear the stories it wanted to tell? You know, sometimes the worst things happen in the quietest places. The SS Valentia was just a ship, but it carried more than cargo. It carried a secret that would sink with it. The night of the storm, the crew heard whispers low, like the sea breathing. Some said it was the wind, others said it was the voices of the dead trying to be heard. They found no bodies, only a single, sealed crate at the bottom of the sea. Inside, a letter, written in blood, saying, "We were never meant to leave." And now, those who dare to dive near the wreck say they hear laughter and see figures in the water wearing old sailor uniforms, but never showing their faces. You might ask, why would a ship vanish like that? And why do the drowned still call out? Well, maybe some things are better left in the dark. I once spoke to a man who said he saw the Valentia's ghost on a stormy night in 1963, right off the coast of New Jersey. He swore he saw the ship's lights flickering like a beacon, but when he tried to get closer, they vanished like smoke. Another told me about a child's doll that kept appearing in the windows of a house near the shore. The doll had a ribbon tied around its neck, just like the ones the Valentia's passengers wore. It was never found, but the house was abandoned years ago. Some say the ship's bell still rings in the early hours, echoing through the waves. If you listen closely, you can hear it, but when you turn to look, there's nothing there, just the sound of the sea. And then there's the woman who claimed she was aboard the Valentia. She said the captain took her hand and whispered, "We're not going to die today." But she woke up years later, still wearing her wedding ring, and the sea had swallowed everything. These stories are not just tales to scare you. They're echoes of the past, reminders that some mysteries never fade. What do you think they're trying to tell us? We started with the records, you know. The ship logs, the passenger manifests, even the old newspapers. But the more we dug, the more the stories seemed to shift like sand. One day it was a storm, the next it was a curse, and then nothing. The sailors said the sea had a mind of its own that night. They claimed the waves came in like whispers, pulling the ship under with a kind of mercy. But the official report said it was a rogue wave, and that's the end of it. The locals still talk about it, you know. The way the water moves in the cove, the way the tide pulls like a siren. They say the ship doesn't just sink, it waits, like a ghost in the deep, ready to pull someone in. And the most strange thing? The names. The names of those who vanished. They weren't just lost, they were erased. No records, no graves, no trace. It's like the sea swallowed them whole, and the world forgot to look. So we kept going. Not because we wanted answers, but because the silence was too loud. And sometimes, the most haunted places are the ones that don't want to be found. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about the Valentia is this one little detail: no one ever explains why the ship was even sailing that night. It wasn't a storm, not really. The logs say the sea was calm, the wind light. So why did they decide to head out at night, with no lights and no crew? You ever think about that? What if the real tragedy wasn't the sinking at all, but the silence that followed? The silence that swallowed every name, every story, every reason. So here's the thing. If you're out there, if you're listening, maybe you can hear it too. That one little whisper in the wind. That one question that's never been answered. And maybe, just maybe, that whisper is waiting for you to ask the right question. You've heard the stories, but some folks say the Valentia's curse isn't just about the drowned. They claim the ship's bones still whisper through the waves, and the sea's memory doesn't let go so easily. There's a local legend that the ship's bell still rings in a fog, and those who hear it are drawn to the water. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a call to join the drowned. Others say the ship was never meant to sail that route, that the stars were wrong, and the sea is still trying to correct the mistake. And then there are the whispers. Some say the ship's ghost is still out there, waiting for someone to take its place, to carry its story forward. You know, some mysteries don't just fade with time, they sink deeper, like the Valentia itself, into the dark waters of our collective memory. The case has been closed for decades, but the whispers never stop. Some say the ship's last log was found in a fisherman's attic, pages yellowed and salt-stained. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But no one has found the bodies. No one has found the truth. And the water, it seems, still remembers what was lost. So what's the real story, dear listener? Was it a storm, a curse, or something older than the sea itself? And if you're wondering, yes, the story's not over. It just waits for the right tide to return. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories aren't the ones that end in terror, but the ones that linger in your mind long after the lights go out. The Valencia's ghosts may have found their peace, but the sea still whispers secrets to those who listen closely. But don't worry, dear listener. Tonight, we'll be telling a new tale, one that'll keep you warm by the fire and wondering long after the story's done. So, wrap up your shawl, and let's drift off into the next mystery. The stories are never far from the fire. You've heard the stories, haven't you? Of a place where time seems to fold in on itself, and the air hums with something just out of reach. That's Blythe Caves, nestled in the quiet hills of rural Virginia. It's not just the silence that chills you, it's the way the wind whispers through the stone, like it's carrying a forgotten lullaby. Some say it's the voice of the cave itself, calling out to those who dare to listen. There's something about the way the caves feel alive, like they're watching, waiting, and remembering. And that's exactly what makes them so dangerous. So, what's it about these caves that make people vanish? Is it the silence, the stone, or something far more ancient that still lingers in the dark? We'll find out soon enough. But for now, let's step into the shadows and see what secrets the caves have to tell. You know, the caves weren't always this quiet. Back in 1947, they were a place of wonder and wild rumors. Tourists came, and so did the locals, all eager to see what secrets the rock had been hiding for centuries. The guides were friendly, but they spoke in hushed tones about the bones found in the deeper tunnels, human bones, they said, and stories of people who never came out. Then there was the woman who claimed to have seen a figure in the dark, whispering her name. She didn't tell anyone, but she left a journal behind, filled with drawings of a shadowy shape and a single word, help. The caves became a local legend, whispered about in backrooms and over cups of coffee. Some said the bones were from a lost tribe, others believed the caves were cursed, and a few, well, they just didn't want to go in anymore. But the real mystery is this: who were the people who vanished in those caves? And why did they never come back? That's what we're here to find out. You remember the first time you heard about the Blythe Caves? It was just a story, a tale passed around the neighborhood, like a secret rap in a whisper. But something about it made your skin prickle, didn't it? The caves were always said to be beautiful, with their crystal formations and cool, echoing halls. But there was something about them that felt heavy, like the weight of old secrets pressing down on the stones. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what it felt like to be the last person to see them? To walk into the dark and realize you weren't alone. That's the first sign that something was terribly wrong. The caves didn't just take them, they made them disappear, as if they'd never been there at all. And that's when the real mystery began. What did they find? What did they see? And why did they never come back? You remember the silence that fell over the caves that night, like the world had held its breath. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the presence of something else, something waiting. The last group of hikers vanished without a trace, their lights going out one by one. No footprints, no calls for help, just an eerie stillness that clung to the air like a ghost. The only thing left behind was a single locket, found days later, half buried in the moss. Inside, a photo of the hikers, smiling, happy, and utterly unaware of what waited in the dark. To this day, no one knows what happened in those caves, but the silence still lingers, and the wind that whispers through the tunnels now carries their names. I once spoke with a retired ranger who claims the caves whisper to those who listen too closely. He said the air feels heavier, like the walls are holding their breath. He described a sound, a low hum, like the echo of a heartbeat, that follows you deeper into the cave. It's not loud, but it's always there. Some say the caves are haunted by the echoes of those who never left. Others believe it's the silence that's the real ghost, so deep, it feels like the world has stopped breathing. If you ever find yourself wandering too deep, listen closely. You might just hear it too, this low, steady hum that feels like the cave is singing to you. The investigation began with a simple request, a map of the caves and a list of names. But what they found was more than just names, it was a tapestry of lost souls, each thread woven with a story that defied reason. One name stood out, Margaret Hargrove. Her disappearance in 1953 was never solved, but the records hinted at something more. Her last known location was just inside the caves, near a hidden spring. The team found a strange pattern. Every missing person had a connection to the caves, often through a family member who claimed to have heard whispers at night or seen a glowing light in the dark. One of the most unsettling discoveries was a set of footprints in the mud near the spring, prints that didn't match any of the missing persons, yet led straight to the mouth of the caves. The deeper they went, the more the caves seemed to breathe. It was as if the stone itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to return. You know, the real mystery isn't the caves themselves, it's that one tiny detail that no one can explain. The last note in the journal, the one that just disappears. It's not a missing page. It's not a tear or a fold. It's just gone. like the cave swallowed it whole, or the wind took it away in the night. You see, the caves have a way of holding things. Stories, secrets, even words. But this one, it's like the cave forgot to tell us what it was. So we come back to the same question. What did the last words say? And more importantly, why did it vanish before it could be heard? Maybe the caves are still waiting for someone to ask. Or maybe they never wanted to be asked at all. You've heard the names, but no one knows the truth. Some say the caves were a lover's hideout. Others say they were a secret lab. What do you think really happened there? The locals still talk about the strange lights that flicker at night, like ghosts trying to signal someone. Have you seen anything like that in your own town? Some say the caves were sealed off after a tragic accident, but others say it was a cover-up. What do you think was hidden inside those dark tunnels? The stories keep changing, like the caves themselves. One thing's certain, no one who enters ever comes out the same. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a mystery isn't finding the truth, it's letting go of the hope that it might exist at all. The caves have been searched, the tunnels mapped, and the bones collected, but no one's ever found the body that vanished in 1978. Some say the caves are cursed. Others say they're just hiding something no one wants to admit was ever there. And still, every year, someone goes in and never comes out. So here's the thing, dear listener, what if the real mystery isn't who disappeared, but why we are still looking? You've been walking through the bones of the Blythe Caves, but did you ever wonder what lies beyond the last flicker of light? Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. There's a story in every echo, and sometimes the silence is louder than the scream. But we've only just begun to listen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go fetch some cocoa. But I'll be right back, just don't wander off. Some places don't like to be left alone. And remember, the best stories are the ones that linger in your mind long after the fire has died down. Stay warm and stay curious. You've heard of the great ships that sailed the Atlantic, steam, steel, and smoke. But what about the ones that vanished without a sound? The USS Cyclops was one of them, and it left behind more questions than answers. Built in 1913, the Cyclops was a massive, 640-foot steam collier designed to carry cargo across the Atlantic. It was big, strong, and built for endurance. But endurance, as we'll soon see, didn't protect it from the unknown. But then, in the early hours of March 4th, 1918, it vanished like a ship never existed. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. Just a ghostly ship and an eerie silence in the Atlantic. The Cyclops was never found, and the mystery of its disappearance has haunted sailors and historians for over a century. Some say it was a storm, others a curse. But the truth, it's still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. So, if you're ready to hear the tale of the USS Cyclops, of a ship that sailed into the unknown and never returned, then pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's begin. You know, the Cyclops wasn't just any old ship. It was a marvel of its time, a monster of a vessel, built to tackle the Atlantic's worst. But even the mightiest ships have secrets, don't they? Built in 1913 by the Cunard Line, it was meant to carry cargo, but it had a hidden talent carrying people. A lot of them. And that's where the story gets interesting. He had a crew that trusted him, sure, but also one that was tired. Tired of waiting for a return, tired of being stuck in the dark, tired of the quiet dread that had been building in the ship's belly. And then there was the cargo. Not just any cargo, sulfur, coal, and a load of manganese. Goods that, if handled wrong, could make even the sturdiest ship feel like a sieve. So, here we are, with a ship that was meant to conquer the sea, carrying goods that could eat away at its hull, and a crew that had been waiting for something they never got to find out. You remember the first time you heard the word Cyclops and thought it was just a ship, not a ghost. But then, the headlines started to whisper of disappearances, and the world felt like it had shifted just a little. The radio calls came in early, like a lullaby of distress. We're heading for the Azores, but we're not sure how long it'll take. It was a normal enough message, until it wasn't. The men on board were not just missing, they were gone, like they'd been swallowed by the sea itself. And no one knew where to look. You can almost hear the ocean whispering, "We were here, and we were lost, and we're still here." It's not just a story, it's a promise waiting to be broken. You know, the Cyclops didn't just vanish, it vanished with a cargo of coal, a crew of 30, and a captain who had every reason to believe he was heading home. One morning, the radio went silent. No distress call, no last message. Just a sudden, unexplained disappearance, like this ship had been swallowed by the very ocean it was built to master. They searched for weeks, scouring the coastlines, checking every port, but the Cyclops was gone, like it had never been there at all. Some say the ocean took them, others say it was a warning, and still, to this day, the crew of the Cyclops is never officially accounted for. Some say their spirits still ride the waves, waiting for the ocean to call them home again. Some sailors claim they saw a ghost ship, a dark silhouette on the horizon, like a shadow of the Cyclops itself. They swear it was there, just before the storm swallowed everything. One man, a survivor of the earlier disaster, said he heard a voice calling from the sea, not in pain but in warning. He couldn't understand the words, but he knew it wasn't meant for him. There's even a tale about a sailor who claimed the Cyclops wasn't just a ship, it was a living thing, like a beast that had taken on the shape of a vessel. He said it wasn't meant to be found. And then there are the whispers. Some say the Cyclops still sails the Atlantic, not for treasure, but for those who are lost, or those who listen too closely to the sea. The investigation into the Cyclops took years, but it was never the same ship. They searched every log, every radio transmission, every sailor's memory, and yet nothing added up. They found records of strange weather storms that never arrived, calm seas that turned violent without warning. Some said the ship was cursed, others that it had been taken by the sea itself. One sailor, a man named James O'Connor, claimed he saw the ship disappear in a blink. He swore the ocean swallowed it whole, like a whale with a taste for steel. The Coast Guard tried to explain it away as a freak storm, but even they couldn't account for the silence. No distress calls, no wreckage, just a ship that had vanished like smoke. In the end, the mystery was never about the ship. It was about the silence that followed, the way the sea could take something without a sound and leave only questions in its wake. You see, the one detail that has never been explained is the absence of any wreckage. Not a single piece of the ship, not even a life preserver or a piece of rope. It's like the Cyclops just vanished into the mist, leaving only silence in its wake. But US Navy searched for months, combed every inch of the Atlantic, but found nothing. Not even the ship's bell, which should have been among the most valuable relics of the era. It's like the ship was never there at all. Like it was a ghost, or a dream, or a story that was never meant to be told. And that's the thing, isn't it? The silence, the stillness, the absence of anything that should have been there. It's not just a mystery, it's a question that haunts the sea itself. Some say the Cyclops never really left the sea, just found a new home in the hearts of those who remember her. They whisper that she still sails the Atlantic, unseen, waiting for the right moment to return. Others believe she was never a ship at all, but a guardian spirit, protecting the coasts from the dark forces that once threatened them. Her disappearance was a warning, not a tragedy. Some even say the Cyclops was never lost, she was taken by the sea willingly to become one with the deep, and that she still watches over the sailors who sail her path. And then there are the ones who say the Cyclops is just a story, a cautionary tale passed down through generations, a reminder that the ocean is both beautiful and cruel, and that we must never forget its power. You know, sometimes the hardest part of a mystery isn't figuring out what happened, but knowing it might never be solved. And that's exactly what makes the USS Cyclops so haunting. No body was ever found, no wreckage ever recovered. Just silence where there should have been a storm. And that silence has kept sailors whispering for over a century. And so, we're left with questions that refuse to die. Who was on that ship? What happened to them? And why does the ocean still remember them? Maybe that's the real ghost of the Cyclops, not the ship, not the crew, but the mystery itself. A whisper on the wind, a shadow on the water, and a story that refuses to end. And as long as we keep asking the questions, the ghost will never rest. That's the thing about mysteries, they don't just vanish. They linger, like the echo of a ship that never made it home. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that never quite end, and sometimes the ocean remembers more than we ever will. The USS Cyclops may have vanished, but the sea has a way of keeping its secrets just like the ones we carry in our hearts. Maybe the Cyclops is just one of many ghosts out there, waiting for someone to hear its tale. But for now, let's leave the sea to its silence and move on to the next mystery. Just remember, the stories are never really over. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That old hotel on the edge of town, the one that's been abandoned for decades. Rumors swirl like smoke in the early morning, and the locals say it's not just the building that's haunted, but the memories inside it. Room 341, they say, is the one that never lets go. The doors don't close properly, and the floorboards creak like a heartbeat. It's a place where the past clings to the present, and the air feels heavier than the rest of the building. There are stories. Some say it's a place where a woman died in a fit of rage. Others say she was murdered. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. The walls in room 341 still remember, and they're not done telling their story. The tapes you see are the real mystery. They were found in the trash, wrapped in a tattered blanket. They're just static and whispers, but they're the only thing left of the woman who once lived there. And now, they're playing in the silence. So, What do you think happened in room 341? Was it a crime, a tragedy, or something far more sinister? That's what we're about to uncover. But first, let's step inside and listen to the silence that still lingers. You see that old sign outside the hotel? It says the Grand View Hotel in faded cursive, but it's been there since the 1940s. The paint's peeling, the letters are half buried in ivy, and the whole thing looks like it's been waiting for someone to notice it. The hotel was built on the edge of a swamp, a place the locals called the Whispering Woods. They said the trees knew the names of everyone who ever walked through them, and that the wind carried secrets from the past. Harold built the hotel to escape the noise of the city, but the silence of the woods turned out to be its own kind of prison. He kept a diary, and it was filled with complaints about the ghosts and the voices that followed him home at night. The last entry in his diary was written the day he disappeared. It said something about the walls closing in and the voices getting louder, and then it just ends. No one knows where he went, but they all say the hotel's still waiting for him. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You ever notice how the first cracks in a wall often start so small? Like a whisper, just a hairline fracture in the drywall, and before you know it, it's a whole new kind of chaos. It was the same with room 341. A tiny, almost imperceptible noise like a door creaking when no one was there. You'd think, oh, just the wind, but the wind doesn't creak like a door. Then came the smell, not the kind that lingers, but the kind that sticks to your bones. Like the memory of a perfume you once loved, but now it smells like something else entirely. And the voices, you could almost hear them, just at the edge of hearing, whispering, not to you, but to each other, like they were talking about something you were never meant to know. You'd think, maybe it's just the building, but there's something about room 341 that feels like it's been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to come back. You remember the silence before the scream, don't you? That moment when the air stops breathing, and the walls seem to lean in closer, like they're holding their breath too. The nurses said it was just a late shift. No one was in room 341 when the lights went out. But the machines didn't stop. They just started playing a recording of a voice quiet, pleading, asking for help. They found the recording days later, tucked inside a drawer beneath the bed. It was just a woman's voice repeating the same phrase over and over, help me, help me, help me. No one ever saw her again. Just a room that stayed empty, and a voice that refused to be silenced. And somewhere, in the silence between the beats, the story still plays on. I remember the first time I heard about room 341. It was a quiet Tuesday, and the nurse at the nursing home where I volunteer was telling me about the time she visited a patient who claimed to see a shadow in that very room. She said the patient would often whisper about a voice in the walls and a door that never closes. I asked if she believed it, and she just smiled and said, some of us are just more sensitive to things. Another visitor, a retired teacher, claimed to hear a child's laughter echoing from the room at midnight. She said it was the same sound every time, like someone was playing a recording of a child laughing in a corner. What's most unsettling is that none of these people ever saw the same thing. It's like the room is whispering to each of them in a language only they can hear. They all agree on one thing, though. The room is never empty. It's just that the things inside it don't always want to be seen. The investigators arrived with a list of questions and a heart full of hope. We walked through the quiet halls of the old hotel, where the silence felt like a living thing pressing in on us from every corner. We checked every room, every closet, every hidden space, but room 341 remained a mystery. The door was locked, and the key wouldn't turn, as if something inside had a will of its own. We found old records in the hotel's archive, but they were incomplete. One name kept appearing, though: Margaret Lyle, a woman who vanished without a trace in 1972. Her story was buried under layers of silence and time. As we dug deeper, we uncovered a pattern: room numbers, dates, and names that matched the hotel's own dark history. Something had been happening in room 341 for decades, and no one had ever spoken of it. The deeper we went, the more we felt the weight of the past pressing down on us. It wasn't just a story, it was a presence, lingering in the walls, in the air, in the silence between the words. You know, the thing that's bugged me most isn't the screams or the cold, it's the silence that followed. Like the room just held its breath after the last note. No one has ever found the recorder. It was never recovered. Just gone. Like the room swallowed it whole, and the tape was never meant to be heard. The nurses say they heard it once, just once, in the middle of the night. A voice, quiet, asking for help, and then nothing. Just silence. And now, every time someone tries to play the tape, it just stops. Like the room is saying, you don't get to hear this. So, what do you think? Was it the room that was trying to warn us, or was it the people who stayed too long? Either way, I don't think it's ever going to stop. Some say the whispers come from the walls, others claim the voices are just the wind. But I've heard the same story told in every bar, every diner, every town square. Room 341 was never empty. They say the nurses used to leave notes in the window, just little scribbles. Please, someone help her. But no one ever did. Not then, not now. There's talk of a ghost in a wheelchair, a woman with eyes like glass who never leaves her room. Some say she's waiting for someone to finally listen. But the real mystery isn't the ghost. It's the silence that followed, and the silence that still lingers in every corner of that old hospital. So, if you're ever in town, don't ask about room 341, just listen. Sometimes, the quietest voices are the loudest. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the silence. Room 341 still stands, untouched, a relic of the past. Do you ever wonder what it's waiting for? The tapes were never found, but the hotel still plays them in its own way through the whispers of the wind, the creak of floors, and the way the light seems to shift just before the sun goes down. The police closed the case, but the mystery never did. It lingers in the minds of those who lived it, and in the quiet corners of this forgotten room where time seems to stop. And so, room 341 remains, a place where the past doesn't stay buried, but waits for someone to listen. Will you be the one to hear it? You know, sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that never quite make it to the page. They linger in the air, like the scent of old paper and something just a little too close. And sometimes, the real ghosts aren't in the rooms we've searched, they're in the ones we've never walked into. So, as we close this chapter, remember, the most haunting things aren't always the ones we see. They're the ones we feel, and sometimes they're the ones that never speak. But don't worry, I've got a few more stories, just like this one, waiting in the wings. Just don't let the door close behind you. You've heard of the Library of Congress, that grand temple of knowledge in the heart of Washington. But have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden in its shadowed corners, where the silence is heavier than the silence of a tomb? The building itself is a marvel of stone and steel, but whispers say that in its oldest wings, the air is thick with something older than time, something that doesn't belong to the present. Some say the library is a place where the past refuses to let go, where the echoes of those who once walked its halls linger in the stillness, waiting for the right moment to speak. And if you dare to listen closely, you might hear it too, a voice, not quite human, not quite lost, but very much present, waiting for you to ask the right question. So, dear listener, are you ready to step into the Library of Congress, where the past is not just remembered, it is still here, waiting for you? You know, the Library of Congress wasn't always a place of quiet learning. Back in the 1800s, it was a warren of shadowy halls and dusty archives where the scent of old paper and ink hung thick in the air. It was a place where secrets were buried, not just books. The real drama started in 1849, when a group of scholars and politicians gathered to debate the future of the nation's knowledge. They were all proud, smart people, but none of them imagined what would come next. Some say the air was thick with ambition that day. The project moved forward, but not without cost. Samuel's vision was ambitious, and he had to navigate political rivalries, funding disputes, and the ever-present threat of losing his position. He became obsessed with making the library perfect, even at the expense of his own health. In the end, the library was built, but not without a price. Some say Samuel's obsession left a mark on the very stones of the building. Others whisper that the library has always been haunted by the weight of its own creation. And now, the pages seem to whisper back. You remember how the air used to smell like old paper and the faint scent of cedar? Well, it changed. The first sign was the smell, something like damp wool and iron, like a storm had passed through the stacks. Then came the whispers, not the kind you hear in a crowd, but the kind that seems to come from the walls themselves. You'd be walking down a quiet aisle, and suddenly you hear a voice just out of reach, murmuring your name. The staff began to argue. Some say it was just the building settling, others thought the books themselves were alive, but no one could explain why the oldest volumes were turning pages on their own, as if someone were reading them in the dark. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And then, the silence. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of something holding its breath. You could hear your own heartbeat in the stillness, and it wasn't the only one. It wasn't just the books that were restless, it was the memories, the echoes of the people who had walked these halls before us, their stories buried in the dust, waiting for someone to listen. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. and tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.